Welcome to the Adirondack Root. We are a grassroots, citizen-driven antidote to corporate media, waking up those who wake up in the Adirondacks.
Never mind all this talk. Will there be deer trails I can walk? Will the forest and streams still be alive?
Today's guest is John Radigan. John relocated to the Adirondacks from Central New York in 1985 to join the faculty of Paul Smith's College, where he stayed for 31 years until retiring last September. During his long career there, he gradually branched out more and more from his original subject, which was literature and English composition, as the college's curriculum needs developed and expanded. As a result of this very North Country process of diversification, by the time of his retirement, he wound up with a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing and Contemporary Poetry, which supplemented the PhD in English he arrived at Paul Smith's with. Several certifications in permaculture, in basic and advanced design, as well as in permaculture teaching, cutting-edge original work in ethics, focusing on Albert Schweitzer's ethics of reverence for life, as a whole person, integral ethics, and a good working knowledge of systems theory, pattern languages, cultural transformation theory, and alternative economics. Throughout this same period, he has been consistently interested also in the interconnections of all these subjects in both their social and their spiritual dimensions, especially as reflected in the practices and worldview of Benedictine monasticism. As a result of all this, John brings to the discussion an unusually varied and well-integrated perspective on the nature and dynamics of our current national and world crisis. I give you John Radigan.
Thank you, Steve, for that introduction. I thought what we could do for this particular session is for me to talk a little bit about just some general background, provide a kind of container for the questions and conversation that follow, and then just open things up to just general open conversation. I'd like to start, basically I'll kind of sketch out what I had in mind talking about. First off, to talk a little bit about some of the historical dimensions that got us where we are today. I think we suffer in this country and this culture from a lot of historical amnesia, so it's nice to kind of correct for some of that. Secondly, to begin to understand how different aspects of systems thinking and pattern language begin to help us understand the dynamics by which that historical stuff has played itself out.
And now, just to wrap my head around this quick, could you explain to us what systems thinking and pattern language mean?
I'll be getting to that when that time comes up.
Perfect.
It'll fit in there, but thanks for asking.
Sure.
I'll keep that question in mind. The third thing I'll talk about is how that specifically relates to the worldview of permaculture, because permaculture is actually the boots on the ground, application of systems theory and pattern language. And finally, to wrap that up by putting this into kind of spiritual context, which I think is really important. So that's kind of where this next few minutes is going, so you can be prepared for that. To kind of preface that, I'd like to just say a couple of things to get us going. First off, I don't know what the audience for this podcast is going to be. I suspect that a number of folk listening to this may be tempted to dismiss some of what I'm going to be saying as just a kind of left-wing, propaganda or indoctrination or brainwashing or something. I'd like to just address that. One of the images I always used to begin my permaculture class with was the image of being on an airplane that's headed down to the ocean. It's about to crash. And it seems to me that if we're on a plane that's about to crash, it doesn't make any difference which side of the aisle you're sitting on, whether it's left or right. I mean, we're all going down. And I take the word as a poet, as an English person who likes language as a writer, I take language seriously. And when it says it's unsustainable means unsustainable. I mean, it's not going to go on. And what we need, I think, is more and more people who are looking out the windows of the plane and say, you know what, maybe we should stop having gunfights across the aisle and take a look at where we're all headed here. You know, and again, I resist being categorized as a leftist, partly because of that little saying I heard a long time ago, it's neither left nor right, we're out in front. We're looking ahead at some of the things that are happening here that nobody's talking about. Nobody's paying attention to it. Nobody's, in touch with it at all. You don't see it in the news. You don't see it in the media. You don't see it anyplace. I offered a course, in fact, at Paul Smith's one year. It's a little freshman seminar course called Alternative Futures. And it's all about stuff that you never hear about, all the positive things that are happening, all the possibilities that you never hear about in the media. So again, I'd like to encourage folk who are listening to this podcast to put aside their tendency to project their own, interior, attitudes or impressions upon what I'm going to say and try to just listen straight out to what's being said. Having said that, we'll say a little bit about some of the historical dimensions of this. And this sounds really dry and horrible, but it's a lot more accessible than that. The issue at stake is a lot of people, especially young people now, think that the system that we're living with is something that's just the way it is. It's always been like that and so on. But actually, it was created, it was invented by somebody, and a number of people, in fact, starting about 100 years ago, about 1920. This was in the wake of the First World War. Remember, next year is the centennial, 100-year anniversary of the armistice, World War I. World War I disrupted everything, and this was a fertile climate for all these different changes to begin coming about, and things we live with now. Many of those things, the problems we have now, were brought into being about 1920, and those include mass marketing. Those include credit stuff. The shift, especially from a needs-based to a wants-based economy. Wants are infinite, and it's a way of kind of generating money for people, big business, big corporations, and so on. A lot of those problems we have now begin to take shape there. Another profound split, or thing that happened in the 20s, people forget now. 1923, Albert Schweitzer, Ethics and Reverence for Life, he published that book in 1923 in Munich, in Germany. Same year, same city, 1923, Munich, Hitler's beer hall putsch took place. So you have these two different things, a profoundly life-oriented, orientation, and profoundly death-oriented upbringing. And we've been wrestling with that ever since. We keep choosing the death direction all the time. And one of the reasons that I got into this stuff is, to the extent that I have, is to encourage us to take the right choice this time. We can't do too many wrong choices before we're out of here. So that's some of the historical stuff that came about. The situation we're living with now is created. It was not a natural thing. It's always been like this. And people need to know that. There are other dimensions to it, but we'll leave it at that. The next part of this, if we can understand or perceive that there's this historical background, historical context for what we're experiencing now, how did we get there? And the most important starting point for that, it seems to me, is from a book by Riane Eisler called The Chalice and the Blade. And the subtitles are History, Our Future. That book came out in 1987 during the Cold War, and it was the first application that I'm aware of chaos theory to social thought. And there's some, as if anything, some controversial parts of it. But the core of it is really, really important. There's several different important pieces of it. The first of those pieces is her way of talking about attractors. This comes back to your question about systems and stuff like that. Attractors are basically forces that work to pull things in different directions. And she said, basically, think about this in terms of two kinds of systems, either stable systems or unstable systems. In stable systems, he says, you have two kinds of attractors working. One is a point attractor, a static attractor, that pulls us in one direction, that's success. Or we can have a periodic attractor that moves like a sine wave. Okay, it takes us from one pole to another, things like that. And we can see that in the alternation, usually between Republicans, Democrats, conservative, and liberal, kind of goes like that every 8 years. And she said that's okay up to a point, but when you get an unstable system, what happens is you have a different kind of attractor that takes place or begins to become operative. And that's what she calls a chaotic or a strange attractor. And what that does, the property of that attractor, is to, flip the whole system into a new stable state consistent with itself. Okay, whichever attractor gets to be the strongest in this thing, that's what's going to flip the system into a new stable state. And that doesn't mean it's going to be a good stable state. We can see that, we're talking about Hitler a minute ago, see that in the chaos of the instability after World War I, what grows up, the Nazi movement suddenly within a few years, a few months, or into a new.
And this is connected with tipping points in some way as well.
Exactly right. Exactly right. It's a tipping point. But the trick is to figure out what the attractors are and how to strengthen the good ones and the powerful ones. If you're going to flip in a good direction. Right? And nobody's thinking about all of this. But you can see all these things at play out here now. So you've got the alt-right, and you've got all this stuff going on. So wait a minute. Those are attractors. They're pulling us. So how do you counter that in some other way? Does that make sense?
Yes.
So far, that's a powerful thing. The other thing that Rianne Eisler contributed to the conversation, which is really important, is her redefinition of power. Okay, she talks about two kinds of power attacks. It's implied in the title, The Chalice and the Blade. And she talks about blade power, which is our power to dominate and destroy. Okay, so when you think about power, think about guns and bullets and bombs and credit cards and stuff, and having clout with your credit card. But the other kind of power is called actualization power. The power to nurture and give life. I'm saying that women do. So that's a power. It's a power to nurture and to give life. And to power, if we're going to strengthen that kind of power in connection with these attractors. Okay, it's another kind of a dimension to that. Okay, so that to me is the starting point for beginning to think about our situation. Start looking at these historical things that we've been tied up in and say, okay, what attractors are in an unstable situation are beginning to be pulled. We're right on the cusp now. We've got 50-50 split in the country. Right? We could go either way right now. And how do we set up some things in such a way that when this thing flips back to the stable state, it's going to be a life-affirming stable state instead of a life-denying stable state. Because essentially what it's happening. Don't forget that far, then the next part about systems theory kicks in. Okay, it gets a little bit more involved in that. So the question is, okay, how do these attractors get stronger? Okay, that's the next question. And the way the attractors get stronger is by a series of what's might call feedback loops. Okay, reinforcing feedback loops. Mm-hmm. Something starts to get stronger and stronger and stronger. You have balancing feedback loops. You have delays. You have nonlinear outcomes. It's not like you put in a quarter and get it back. You do some little thing here, there's this huge impact over here you didn't expect. Right? It's like not getting too political, but Trump, was shooting down that jet in Syria. Suddenly, now it has this huge impact. We're going to get something to Syria. Little thing, suddenly there you are. That's a case in point. A little input has this huge output you didn't expect. And again, people aren't thinking in those systemic kinds of terms.
And what strikes me as you're saying this are the parallels between this happening in the natural world and this happening just with basic human interaction, social dynamics.
Yeah, it happens all over. It's a social, it's not just an empirical scientific thing, it happens in social settings all over. Yes. And we'll come to about permaculture in a minute. But again, once you start thinking like that, this puts a whole different spin on history. Nobody talks about this stuff in the paper. You never see it in the news, nothing. Nobody's talking about that. But that is why this is such a critical and urgent time in history. We should right at this cusp of whether the forces of death are going to take over from the forces of life. So we start thinking about these feedback loops and how you can resist. If you want to build a strong, life-giving feedback loop, well, how can you do that? It gives you some specific ways that you can conduct yourself, specific causes you can support, specific interior spiritual places you can be to strengthen those life things before the bad guys take over, so to speak. Again, this is very impersonal. The system's going to work one way or the other. So you need to be careful of that. So we start thinking about the feedback loops, the delays built in, nonlinear, things and so on. And the other cool thing to think about, and a lot of this stuff comes from, by the way, from Donella Meadows' book, Thinking in Systems. She has a great chapter in there with some of the important leverage points and how to change the system. And she has 6, and she arranges them in order from least to most powerful. And the 3 most powerful ones are, first off, and this is really relevant to us, the first off is to maintain the diversity in the system. That's the first most powerful leverage point in changing a system, because you've got nothing to work with, nothing's going to happen. You think about the natural world with all the biological diversity, that's how things keep going. Maintain the diversity in the system. So you see people trying to shut down the natural endowment for the humanities, and the arts say, no, that's cutting down the diversity. Keep out the riffraff, it's cutting down you've got to keep the diversity in the system. So this issue about immigration, for example, is a systems-oriented. We oppose that. You don't oppose it because you don't like Trump. You oppose it because that violates a leverage point in the system. Okay, you're not maintaining diversity. The second most powerful one is to change the goals of the system. Okay, for example, if our goal became not economic growth, but maybe promoting health for everybody. Change the goal of the system. We're not going to do this anymore. We'll do this over here. That's the second one. So you don't have to necessarily be locked into those goals that the system, describes for you. They say, wait, let's change the goals. Do this instead of that. The songs we were listening to earlier, things that money can't touch. Well, it's not really about money. You think about the Bhutanese happiness index. You heard about that?
No, I have not.
Oh, nobody's heard of that. It's wild. Bhutan has what they call the National Happiness Index, where they figure out how successful they are, but how happy the people are in the country. Let's change the goal of the system. Instead of making a lot of money, let's have the goal of make people as you can happy. Oh, okay, that's cool. That's a very powerful leverage point in the system. Just think out of the box a little bit. But again, it's not just some mindless sort of, resistance, but just thinking about this in a systemic way, it connects into how this works. It empowers what you're doing instead of just, going out to do something to make noise. And then the third of those leverage points is just change the whole paradigm. Okay, and that's another thing. One of the biggest and most dangerous paradigms we have right now is the paradigm of economic growth. Right? That's where the Republicans and Democrats meet. We talked about that at one point. Economic growth. You can't have an infinite economic growth in a finite system. You can't do it. It's unsustainable. It's going to crash. You know that. So let's change the paradigm. Can we do something different? And that's why Amartya Sen comes in different measures of wealth other than money. Can we do something different? So those are some leverage points that you can use. You can notice once you're aware of that, it doesn't take very much to get a pretty good feel for that. Once you're aware of that, you can make decisions about how to position yourself in a systemic and it's rooted into historical dynamics. It's like that. It's not rocket science to figure this out. Okay, does that make sense to everybody so far?
Very much. And one thing I want to add is that book that profoundly changed my life that I read in the early 90s was written by David Corton, When Corporations Rule the World. Yep. And John and I have a lot of kind of common reading that we've done that we've been able to connect on. Also, Scott Peck's work we talked a lot about. But Corton talks a lot about just the fallacy of, just economic growth for the sake of economic growth. A lot of things that contribute to economic growth are things that none of us would want in our lives. When a couple gets divorced, that's economic growth. When somebody gets diagnosed with cancer, that's economic growth. There's money being exchanged to deal with these things. But those aren't the things we want to promote in our society. Horton talked a little bit in that book about happiness index. Yeah. I don't know if that was, I think that was maybe previous to Bhutan maybe actually implementing it. I don't know.
Unless he borrowed it from them.
Maybe he borrowed it from them. That's very possible.
Yeah, but the other thing, Corton has a later book called Change the Story, Change the Future, which is also a nice way of putting what I'm talking about in accessible terms. Change the story, change the future. We're living by the story. There's other stories out there. You don't have to live by this one. Change the narrative, change the future, change the story. And again, this is not to indoctrinate them. You better do that. Just to offer a choice, And as long as people don't know there's a choice, you can't choose.
Well, and also to give people accurate information. I mean, I think your point you made right in the beginning about people think this is the way things have always been. But yet you look at many issues plaguing our society, they are not set up the way they've always been.
No,
For instance, student debt.
yeah.
If you look at, when Lincoln created land-grant universities, they were tuition free until Nelson Rockefeller changed that in the early 60s. So the notion that we just have to charge students tuition, there are other ways, but it's going to take cooperation, it's going to take compromise, it's going to take really talking to each other.
Yeah.
But as long as we don't have a memory of something different, it's a little easier to accept that these things are inevitable. And certainly, for-profit healthcare, that's another example. This kind of, bankruptcies through medical debt. This is something that didn't happen decades ago, but it's been happening at an accelerating rate.
Well, I can put this in even more personal terms, and put it more concrete terms. As I kind of implied at the beginning, I've got 4 college degrees. And it's not to blow my horn, but to point out my total amount of money that I spent for those degrees was $5,000. Total. And the reason I I first went to Binghamton for my BA. I had a Regent scholarship. The total, this is the students in Binghamton. The semester, every tuition for each semester is $265. And that was covered by Regent scholarship. So I had to borrow money for room and board, full freight was covered. And I mention that because the reason for it, this is why the debate now, I don't get too far into this, but this is part of that whole thing. Part of the problem now is, the reason I could do that is because the country and the state recognized education as a public good, and they're willing to support that. And over time, in my lifetime, this is the last 50 years, in my lifetime, that support has eroded more and more to privatization. You're on your own, who cares, you don't need all these people out here, you don't need liberal arts majors, and the government public support, the consensus that education is a public good is eroded. That's the trouble. That's the source of the debt crisis. That's the source of the debt crisis. It's not we should forgive debt. No, it's what happened to this, societal agreement that education is a public good.
Yes.
That's what I mean by changing the paradigm.
Right.
Okay, and there's a negative change, you see what I mean?
Yes.
So you go below even that kind of shallow level of debate to really what happened. That's what you need to look at. So anyway, that's like a little personal aside to that.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
go through all that. Anyway, having said that, so we have some sense of the history, some of the dynamics, the systems dynamics by which those historical things have developed and played themselves out. And this brings us now to the question of what are you going to do about that? To come back to that initial image I have of a plane going down. Okay, well, how do you cope with that? If you're in a plane that's going down, so all the systems have failed, those things. Plane's headed for the water. What are you going to do to get this thing back so you don't go over the tipping point into a disaster? And this is where the stuff from Schweitzer and permaculture becomes important. Okay, so I want to talk about just a couple minutes a little bit about that. I don't say much about Schweitzer. So we have a human tendency to reduce people and reduce great ideas to things that are manageable. So most people have never heard of Schweitzer. He's one of the great personalities, one of the great ethical thinkers of the 20th century. Nobody's ever heard of him. I taught that stuff in my classes at Paul Smith's for something like 16 years, and every year I asked, anybody ever heard of him? Nobody's ever heard of him. Anybody under 30 has never heard of Schweitzer. So just submerge this guy. Well, what he worked out, and I've taken 20 years to figure this out, is a system of ethics. It wasn't a system. It's called reverence for life. And it turns out that what that is a way of breaking out ethics away from the human, taking in all life forms whatsoever, the plants and bugs and birds and animals and everything else. And this entire web of life is he developed this in 1919. 1920, in fact, he worked it out during the First World War. He was under house arrest. And it's been on the table for 100 years. Nobody's ever heard of it. And to put a lot into a short space, basically what I've worked out over the last 20 years is that this idea of reverence for life takes in it includes all of ethics. Once you start looking at that is the pattern of all ethics. You talk about pattern language. Pattern language is basically, if you think about a dress pattern, okay, a bunch of paper, okay. You can make all kinds of specific dresses out of that one pattern. They'll have the same kind of shape. But Schweitzer's reverence for life is the pattern for all ethics. Okay, all ethics is included in that somewhere. And it's an integral ethics because it takes in all spirit, mind, and body, the whole person. A lot of ethical, standard academic ethics a lot of academic ethics is all rationalism, arguments and counter-arguments and stuff. And this takes in the whole person's spirit, mind, and body, and it connects you into the natural world. And you can prove that empirically. It's not just an opinion. So that's the core of that. The reason I mention and bring that up is because permaculture, which is started about 1980 roughly in Australia, comes from a combination of two words. One is permanent agriculture, the other is permanent culture. Again, it's kind of it has both an agriculture and a social dimension to it. And I mention that because permaculture is kind of like a coherent system out of an expanding circle based on ethics. All right? And the ethical core in permaculture, the traditional ethical core in permaculture, is care for the earth, care for people, redistribution of surplus. Well, earth care, people care, fair share. Well, it turns out, I had a little article in Permaculture Activist a few years ago on this, turns out that that is not quite the basic. Reverence for life is the pattern for that. So reverence for life lies at the core of permaculture. And everything else grows out from that as far as you want to take it. And all permaculture practice, involves that. Again, I mentioned permaculture because it was that. It's been all over the world. There's upwards of 1 million certified designers out there. It's a worldwide movement. No one's ever submerged it. We have international convergences every year, and with local, regional convergences. People get together. It's a huge, it's an explosive thing. But you notice how it brings in some of that life-oriented stuff. Schweitzer's idea of being, reverence for life is the core of all ethics, makes that a powerful factor. Anybody, anywhere is going to be ethical as part of that. They don't even know it. The minute you wake up with that, holy cow, we got a tractor here you can take to the bank. You want a life-oriented tractor that's going to pull out, and you get the boots on the ground part of that in the application of permaculture.
Yes.
Okay, both in its agricultural aspect and especially in its social aspect. Again, you start looking at ways in which you can do things like produce no waste. That's one of the principles of permaculture. Okay, imagine a society that produces no waste. Wow, we got this junk floating around the Pacific and plastic and stuff like that. Imagine the culture that didn't produce that stuff. Whoa.
Well, when we look to nature, we see models of it.
Exactly right. You're working with nature, not against it. Most of Western culture works against nature. Well, let's start working, let's change the paradigm. Let's work with nature, because that's what makes permaculture such a seditious, revolutionary way of thinking.
And yet, what I thought of is what Albert Schweitzer really came up with and can be proved empirically and is really a godsend, I think, for our culture.
Absolutely.
I mean, it came from, organically from Western thought. Yet this, many of these foundational ethics were present in indigenous societies all over the world until they were destroyed.
Yeah, Schweitzer is a great link between Western culture and indigenous thought.
Yes.
Absolutely is. He's right there on it. And it's been around for thousands. Not like we're rediscovering this stuff. It's been around forever. But he didn't really necessarily say that. But he was very close to the earth. But he knew it. He was running a permaculture thing in this hospital in Africa for 50 years. He didn't call it that, but that's what he had.
Mm-hmm. And I would imagine a lot of that was necessity.
Sure.
I'm finding that myself. I've had some just personal, nothing really severe, but I've had some financial speed bumps in my life lately that have kind of caused me to be a lot more resourceful and resilient in terms of meeting my needs and the needs of my little orbit. But I've learned so much. If I just had a credit card line, I could have just simply had my problems fixed by simply going and purchasing and really being wasteful and not really looking at the big picture.
Yeah, that's it.
Because it would have been the easier, expedient thing to do, looking at solving that short short-term problem, but not really looking far ahead.
You're thinking about it, and what's this doing to that whole systemic thing? They're
Right.
pushing something. You see what I mean? All these
Yes.
things begin to interconnect. I'm hoping not making this thing too complicated. This is basically the way this all connects together. So permaculture, I've always thought about that as kind of the life raft. If you see the plane going down, to come back to the original image, plane going down, what do you do? Well, to get out the life raft and get ready to hit the water, you've got something to step into. Because if this system that we're living in is really non-sustainable, the important thing is to be ready to have something viable to step into when the crash happens. You look out beyond the present situation, what's going on, what's going to happen here in the next 50 years? That's like the question Dan Berggren asked. My daughter asked, the tree's still going to be around. Well, don't know, but let's get ready.
Yeah.
So you have a more healthful, more life-giving place to step into. You don't repeat the same mistake again.
And the fact is that there's all this stuff out there for us to learn.
Yeah, it's
and
been out there
it's
forever.
yeah.
Been out there for 60 years. You had E.F. Schumacher, Small is Beautiful. You got, Rianne Eisler. You got Corton. You got all kinds of people that are talking about it. And for 60 years, nobody's paying attention to it.
Yeah,
Well,
and let's not forget Rachel Carson, her contribution,
Yeah,
just in
absolutely.
warning us what's happening to our natural world.
Yeah, that's exactly it. You talk about Thomas Merton. You've had correspondence with Rachel Carson. All kinds of people. It's all out there. Schweitzer's been on the books for 100 years. Where is everybody? We don't. I remember after Hurricane Irene came through. Andrew Cuomo said, "Oh, we got to start thinking about what do you start thinking about? We've been thinking about this for 100 years. Where have you been? Get over it." So anyway, that's somehow the stuff in Schweitzer looks in this ethical, thing where you build these not only agricultural, self-sustaining systems, resilient systems, but also these, resilient, self-sustaining social systems, which include things like transition towns. People whole communities buy into this value of, self-sustaining, resilient ways of living. Closer homes, don't have the money to spend money close to home, whatever they are. Those kinds of alternatives to what we've got going on now. So that's kind of how some of that fits. And to bring that around kind of full circle, one of the problems I think we've got, in talking about historical memory, Alexander Solzhenitsyn talked about this at his Harvard commencement address in 1978. His after he was kicked out of the Soviet Union. He's a Nobel Prize-winning Russian author. He gave the commencement address at Harvard in 1978. And all the conservatives expected him to say, "Oh, that evil empire." He didn't. What he said in that address enraged his critics, or enraged the conservatives. He said he split in the world between the United States and Russia and the Soviet Union. So it's less important than the common disease that affects both sides. So as you've got in the Soviet Union, you've got the party mob that tramples on everybody. In the West, you've got the commercial mob that tramples on everybody. It's the same problem on both sides of the fence. Well, we've got the same problem now. I remember hearing something on NPR last September, I think, around the time of 9/11, talking about the Congress passing the War Powers Act. Gave President Bush, the authority to go ahead and counterattack or whatever. One member of Congress voted no. I think her name was Barbara Lee. And the reason she voted no was because of something she heard in church the day before the vote, where the minister said, we don't want to become what we abhor. And she could see in the vague language in that war powers the seeds for becoming what we abhor. And as we've traced this out over the last 6 years, she got hate mail, she got all kinds of things from that. But as we looked out over the next 16 years or so now, we noticed we've begun to become what we abhor, ignorant, violent nation, just like the people in the terrorists in Iraq or whatever. It's the same disease on both sides.
In this argument, I think you can really see it in coming from past wars. If you look at the Civil War, the compromise that happened after Reconstruction, I mean, basically what happened, you had the racists, the plantation owners, the slave owners took over the South again. You had Jim Crow legislation, and really that racism seems to have metastasized and infected the North. And in the end, who really won? In 1890, if that war we're taught it's about states' rights and everything, but the people who fought it, I think it was clearly about this economic system and about ending that economic system. And it would be nice to think that slavery ended. I know we just had Juneteenth, so it's good that slavery formally ended, but has it ended?
Well, it hasn't. Not only do you have all this stuff on the Thai fishing boats and stuff, plus you have just a retranslation then to colonialism.
Yeah, and mass incarceration with
all
forced labor in prisons.
It shifts around. It doesn't go anyplace.
And then with World War II, with fascism, with this imperialist design of Hitler, did we bury that? Or what's happened to it? It almost seems like that's one area that's off the table right now.
You can't talk about that.
We don't want to talk about the big elephant in the room. So I think these things are all connected. It's vitally important to be talking about.
Yeah, once you begin to see the connections, you start to say, okay, this is you see what I mean. That's why seeing connections and next memory is so important. I mention all this because you mentioned the Benedictines in your introduction. One of the reasons it's so important is because we share as common, humanity, this faulty, messed up, dark kind of, interior space. We're flawed human beings. And we cannot get ourselves out of this, in my view, alone, all by ourselves. Okay, there's a great thing, a little book on the 23rd Psalm, written by a guy who's a former shepherd. And he talks about this phenomenon called a cast-down sheep. Okay, it's turned from sheep herding, as it turns out. And so a cast-down sheep is a sheep that's kind of rolled over on his back and he can't get up. And unless the shepherd comes and gets him back on his feet, he's going to die. And you remember it's in the Bible, you have tons and tons and tons of these images of sheep and shepherds. Well, they're laying in your back, with their feet in there. You can't get on your feet yourself. We can't solve this ourselves. Every time you try to do it, you get into some other bad place. And you can see that it's not a matter of some weird, touchy-feely kind of mysticism. It's just look around. And one of the reasons that I like the Benedictines so much is they provide a method for contacting the power that can put you back on your feet. It's again, that's something they were founded, as you know, in St. Benedict in the 6th century. And they've been through 1,500 years of track record of saving civilization. They're pretty good background on that. They got through the fall of the Roman Empire, they got through all the world wars, they got through Napoleon, they got everybody. 1,500 years straight. They got it right. And I think being aware of our limitations as humans, instead of kind of running out. I was just reading a book by N.T. Wright about idolatry. It says the first problem we've got is taking our power that we have and translating it and giving it to some idol over here within the creative order. Like whether it's money or power or whether it's whatever, some addiction or other drugs or whatever. You give your power away, guess what? You can't do anything. As you put your power back where it belongs, realign it with the power you're supposed to have in the first place, connection with the sacred, then you got something. But as long as you further it away, give it away to somebody else, you get more. That's one of the reasons, in my view, why history is so messed up and why we're so messed up. And you can see some of that in the case of our present people. Their addiction is to power, to prestige, to whatever it is, instead of where it needs to be. And to try to get back on that communal thing that Jim Wallace talks about of the common good. So back on that airplane, the common good is how do we get ourselves out of this instead of having gunfights across the aisle. You're a leftist or on the right wing. Let's shut up. Look, the plane's going down. Let's work on it. How can we get this common good back together? And again, that's a matter of changing the paradigm in the sense that intervention point.
And I'm so glad you said that because really that's, I wish I could have boiled it down to that in my introduction. But you said it. That's really what our goal is, I think, here. Our group, Citizen Vanguard, we're trying to flip the paradigm.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really what we're trying to do.
And to make the point, the paradigms are out there. The alternative paradigms are all over the place. You don't have to be locked into this thing as the thing goes down. You don't have to. You can choose to, but if you can't choose, if you don't really have a choice, get over it. So anyway, that was, I don't know if that went longer than I thought. That's kind of what I wanted to say by way of context. And you just opened up to further questions or conversation. I'm happy to do that.
All right.
John, do you have anything that came out of all that?
It's a lot of stuff to work over.
Yeah.
All right. I'm dwelling on it.
I'm only sure I can cut you out of the conversation.
So anyway, we certainly need to build resilience, and yet, politically, obviously we need to start at home. We need to start locally. I mean, when it comes down to it, we need to start individually, maybe reconnecting with this power that we've all been blessed with, that we've all been born into. I have a few questions that are quite disconnected from what we were just talking about.
Okay.
I guess one thing I wanted to talk to you about is this phenomenon of, since Trump's got elected, much of the nation has been mobilized to resist this clear, kind of crass commercial, imperialist agenda he seems to have. And yet, it seems like much of the population has been conditioned to think that we have this maybe stable state, varying between conservative and liberal, Democrat and Republican. But really, in those two parties that we are told are the only viable parties, a lot of things that need to be talked about are not talked about. And then when ultimately you step back and look at the big picture, you see that it's the same, really, people, the same forces, the same money contributing to both parties, and really trying to define the parameters of permissible discussion in what's acceptable politically. I believe that's a big reason many young people are just completely disconnected from politics.
Of course, that's why I taught the stuff that I taught at Paul Smith's, to provide the alternative to that. There's a whole bunch of young people where you don't have to buy that stuff. You don't have. I'm not trying to indoctrinate you. Education is not about indoctrination. Education is about providing some additional choices to look at and showing you how to make it. You can figure it out yourself once you can do it. I'm not trying to you better go out and believe the way I believe. That's crazy. But here's some other things you might not have thought of, you might want to consider when you're making your decision. If you don't know there's a choice, you can't make a choice. Therefore, you talk about indoctrination and brainwashing, the whole system moves in there. No, what real education is about is over here. There's more stuff.
And I think of the way the world has changed in my lifetime, and I would imagine, to various degrees, we've all seen it. But just look at the realm of music, where I used to be able to drive across the country and hear different regional music and get a real different flavor of culture wherever I went. And just the fact that things have been increasingly homogenized in our culture, and the homogenization doesn't seem to be homogenizing things up to a higher level.
No,
it doesn't seem like the races suddenly became enlightened and more urbane. No, it seems like it's a really, things have just gotten cruder across our culture, across our society.
You can see the reinforcing feedback loop.
Yeah.
Building that. That's an example of the reinforcing feedback loop. That's why Trump is such a dangerous person. He's feeding that feedback. He's got a powerful position now. Feed that. That's a feedback loop. And what we're trying to do is to build alternative feedback loops and neutralize and then overcome it.
Right.
Okay, to think about this in systemic terms, and you can get someplace. And again, the fact that we talk about the tipping point from Malcolm Gladwell. This is a crucial point. You got 50-50 split in the country. This is not like 30-70. It's 50-50. You could go either way. We're in a real serious spot. People don't have any sense of the urgency.
Well, and yet, I guess the trouble I have with that analogy is, Trump seems to embody this really dangerous attractor because of the vile things he represents, the vile things he says, who he has surrounded himself with. It is very, I don't think somebody could have written a dystopian novel 15 years ago, included Donald Trump, because I think it would have been a little bit too far out there to accept,
The operative word the last year was unthinkable, right?
Yeah, unthinkable.
No. It's one thing that makes me nervous. By the way, footnote that by the way, he's been in office 5 months today. It's May 20th, sorry, June 20th. It's 5 months today, and we've had nothing but turmoil since. And what makes me very nervous is that this will begin to become normal, seem normal.
Well, but
That's what makes me nervous.
but I guess I have trouble with the narrative we're articulating because as I see it, we have been in trouble for, and it varies by individual. It seems to me that it's been the end of the line for a lot of people, an increasing number of people, my whole lifetime. And I've got to say, when I was very comfortable in making a lot of money and actually had more time to read a lot of these books, which I'm glad I had, it gave me the time to get grounded in a lot of these things. My comfort, in some way, I think, inhibited me from empathy with some of my fellow human beings. I think it really did insulate me. And as terrible as Trump is, I think it's heartening that now we have mass mobilization all across our country against.
Yeah, see, one of the problems with this, why I brought up this stuff about the Benedictines, however, okay, is that shooting of the Congressman Scalise the other day, right? And he already had a column in the paper about that, from one of the conservative columnists, pointing out that now this left-wing violence, quote unquote, is no different than right-wing violence. So you got to be careful how you respond to that. Okay, that's what I said about the twos of meeting at the same point. You yell about these right-wing maniacs and you're out there shooting people. In yourself, the left-wing, right-wing, it's a human issue. We're all subject to that. Yeah.
And I would agree that the tipping point that we kind of foresee will really come when this kind of crisis of violence all begins to materialize at once, and instead of it always just being this, we communicated first, and the people who resort with violence, they usually get kind of ostracized by everybody else. I think we're going to see this tipping point when finally both sides decide that their violence is justifiable because of the other side. And that's where we finally hit the wall.
That's where we're headed. That's where we're headed, because that's what the shootings about.
I just read yesterday, it was the anniversary of a Mother's Day massacre down in Pennsylvania, I believe. Or no, it was in Ohio, Youngstown, Ohio. But the labor strikers, what happened was during some earlier labor strike, the company really reached out with a lot of public relations to the wives of the strikers, sort of in telling them to get their husbands back to work, and ended up breaking the strike. So the union this time really involved the women. They had a women's auxiliary, and the one day they had the women down on the picket line, and it ended up, violence broke out. Unfortunately, I think 16 people were murdered, hundreds were hospitalized, but police opened fire on the crowd. Sorry, I don't remember the name of the company, but yeah, they wanted really harsh. The police were doing the bidding, and certainly, the newspapers were solidly on the inside of the plant. The strikers were seen as very unsavory and unpopular, but the fact is that when women were attacked on that line, the fact that the unarmed strikers, and they were unarmed, stood their ground and fought and took tremendous losses. But the fact is, there was a point where that violence, their effort to be nonviolence, it crossed a threshold. It reached a tipping point where their anger and their, whatever happened, it descended into a terrible violence.
Let me suggest an alternative to that, just for what it's worth. Did you ever see the movie Gandhi?
Yes,
Kingsley?
I have.
Remember that? Ever seen that, John? Remember that scene in there at the Salt Works? Where they have these waves and waves of guys that have their British guards, and the waves and waves of guys come up, they club the guys all day long, and sling it back, and the wave comes up, just keep coming out. By the end of the day, the British power authority is broken. Okay? That says something. The same thing in South Africa, with the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. I mean, there's something about the power of truth. Nonviolence is the only thing that can stop it. Otherwise, it just becomes a cycle. That's what I mean about finding those resources in yourself and your spiritual orientation. There's nothing in the Scripture anyplace that advocates this violent approach to things. That's one of the things. That's the scary part. So we've all got that turn to go out and want to shoot that rabbins and ready to go. But that's a human tendency we all share. The darkness. I mean, one of the most powerful moments of my whole life. Was one of my lectures I went to at my MFA program, and the guy that delivered became my teacher for a year. He just got back from the Balkans. It was 1992. And he was talking about the role of poetry in a difficult time. He was having this conversation with a friend of his in Slovenia about that. And meanwhile, there's all these atrocities which he described going on literally in sight of where they were. As they were poets for it. And he said one of the rules of political poetry is we can't point fingers. We all are complicit in the situation. Okay. And I went back to my room afterward and I cried for half an hour. I couldn't stop. It broke me right open. Realized you've got all that savagery and darkness inside you, just like everybody else does. You're no better than ISIS. They're no less human than we are. Right? And that suddenly becomes why it is it gets so concerned about this whole spiritual side. How do you neutralize that? How do you keep it under control so that you don't become part of that thing? When you go over the line into violence, you've given in to that savagery.
You become part of the problem.
You become what you were born.
And actually, if I remember, and I can't remember exactly which civil rights leader said it, but they said that the establishment does not know how to deal with our nonviolence. They know how to deal with us when we're violent,
That's right,
but
yeah.
they don't know how to.
That's right, and that's
Absolutely.
what the British ran into with Gandhi.
Exactly.
What do you do with this guy? What do you do with these people that just keep coming? What do you do with people that sidestep you? People develop local currencies and don't pay attention to your money anymore. What do you do with groups of people who make a pool of money and everybody has a medical bill they pay it? They ignore insurance companies. What do you do with people like that? I find all these different ways of.
We need to be creative.
Exactly.
I mean, frankly, a friend of mine told me, and I, being human and being weak, I mean, I've certainly succumbed to those dark forces in my life in the past. But a dear friend of mine years ago just really hit me the truth of it. But that violence is just a terrible failure of the imagination. It's a terrible failure of the
imagination. That's right. I came across a great distinction the other day from Joan Chittister in a book called Heart of Flesh, of all things, which Frontier said Heart of Stone. She talks about two different approaches to life. One is to go through stomping and kicking and getting everything goes away. The second is to walk softly. She said the first one depends on might. The second one depends on strength.
I like that.
I like that.
First one depends on might, second one depends on strength. And I think that says it.
And I really have faith in the strength of the people here. I was telling John, I think I mentioned to you yesterday, briefly during our conversation about my friend Larry Lamphere. I hope to get together talking. But, here's a guy just in tune with the rhythms of nature and just, I think a man of true strength. And in being vulnerable. There's strength in being vulnerable. There's strength in being open.
That's the ultimate strength. That's what Jesus did in the garden. The ultimate vulnerability at the moment of ultimate peril. Gave away all his defenses at the moment of ultimate peril. That is the group. That's something nobody wants to do. They're one of the most difficult, the most difficult thing you can do. Throw away your defenses at the moment of ultimate peril. And once you do that, any force is powerless against you.
Well, I mean, look at, and once again, I think, a lot. These are. I hope we can continue this conversation long into the future. But I think back on a figure like John Brown, very polarizing figure in American history. A lot of people would simply write him off because he did use violence. Mm-hmm. And yet, when you study John Brown and you study, not only his motives, but some of the things he did during the raid. Really of compassion and of, certainly not with the idea to succeed at all costs. So, anyway, I'd like to talk more about John Brown when we resume.
Absolutely.
So I'm just thinking what. I just kind of wanted to openly ask, what direction would you like us to move in terms of questions? Because I have a bunch of ideas, but.
Well, I enjoyed us talking about Harper's Ferry in the car, and I think that does, offer up a lot of interesting questions, about how. Well, I think it's very interesting, the complicated character that John Brown would be,
yes.
Above all.
And I think that I'm thinking maybe we ought to pick up where we left off, because I'm really intrigued by John Brown for sure. And the kind of the differences between say, that particular issue at the time, that, between the abolitionist perspective and the reformist perspective. And I see a lot of parallels there with, I think, I find a lot more vitriol as a green coming from Democrats than I do coming from Republicans.
Vitriol, how?
And I almost wonder if we ought to have the camera rolling. But
Do you want me to press play?
I mean, I guess we can always edit it, but
You can leave this part out if you want.
yeah, we can always leave it out if we want. That's
Oh,
right.
oh,
And even where I was stumbling, maybe we can fix it up a little bit. Yeah, my idea is that, when you have this notion that, the country is divided 50-50 and we all need to band together against Trump. We need to band together against Trump. So therefore...
No, we don't. That's the mistake. That's a mistake. Because Trump is not the focal point. Trump is really a representative of the forces in the country.
Hallelujah.
Okay, so we need to address the forces in the country that led to his rise. Focusing on him was really a distraction.
And in fact, I would say, why isn't our media focusing on Robert Mercer, who basically funded Trump's political rise, funded Ted Cruz's near capture of the nomination?
Why are they focusing on the Koch brothers, who on May 19th, take a look at the front page story in USA Today, that's out in Florida, blatantly came out and going to buy, invested millions of dollars to buy the votes to pass the tax cut. Who cares what the country wants? It says it's going to be more difficult if we don't do it. Why is that? Because the rest of the country doesn't want it. Who cares if the rest of the country wants it? We want it. We have billions of dollars to pour into it. We are going to get what we want. That's the people you need to be looking at.
And when the country's distracted from that...
Yeah, that's all distraction. It's all distraction.
Yes.
What Prince Henry's doing over in London or whatever, yada, 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 the new thing, and they keep your distractions up. Even this whole Russia probe is a distraction from what's really going on. That's all distraction, infotainment. Don't get a chance to focus on what's important. I gave up watching news for a number of reasons, not least of which you spent half your newscast with some kid stuck in a sewer drain over in Oshkosh, Ohio somewhere. I don't care about that. I want to know something important. I don't want this human interest stuff. Give me something that's got some teeth in it. I want to know what's like that. That's important. And I don't know, let's look at this kid stuck in the drain over there.
And then you look at what's fueled a lot of the alt-right, a lot of things. Somebody that actually I turn to a lot of times for information, and I don't know if it's going to be warmly received by a lot of people to hear this, but I mean, I used to seek out Alex Jones for one reason, and that's because he was talking about issues that nobody else would talk about, and he would have guests on there that nobody else would invite. So even though I thought he was a very obnoxious character, and I certainly didn't accept many of the things he was saying, I had a certain respect for him.
I want to borrow your sheet for me.
Come to find out that the Koch brothers are behind Alex Jones. And here I was. How much was I taken in? I don't know. But it's, when you look at the media situation in this country, what's allowed to happen, and then the other thing that troubles me with a lot of the, I don't know what term we want to give them, but the, say the Democratic Party line, or maybe the liberal perspective, the neoliberal perspective, that the Democrats aren't as bad as the Republicans. And clearly, I think we've established in some past conversations, they're not as insane as the Republicans. They acknowledge much of reality that Republicans don't acknowledge. So I think I'm comfortable in saying that they are less insane. But in terms of changing the paradigm, it seems like the Democrats are as invested in this paradigm as anyone.
Well, let's back up a little bit. There's a lot of different, I think you're right. I think that we talked about this in media all the time, that the thing that unites us too is that commitment to the paradigm of economic growth. That's But again,
And in imperialism.
yeah, imperialism.
Which is just one engine for that economic growth.
Absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely.
Maybe the primary engine.
Very true.
Are we on camera?
No, you didn't say go.
Oh, okay.
I've asked you guys-
I'm sorry. I guess we ought to be.
I
We ought
asked
to
you
be.
to start recording.
We ought to think that we're not and actually be, rather than thinking that we are and not.
Yeah. Here. So.
Let's jump.
I
I've got a couple things to add.
Oh wait. Oh my God. I didn't even. I never paused this.
Okay, so you have been recording the voices, and I can edit out little
Oh,
pieces
yeah,
that
cool.
we're confused about. So, but
So,
this,
okay.
No problem.
So we
But that's
can edit out this part and maybe
Sure.
fill in the lack of video with something cool,
Sure.
appropriate.
I'll go back to some historical stuff in a minute.
it's a lot.
We'll put some video
Oh,
montage,
sorry.
like
Well, just-
pictures of Albert Schweitzer,
Yeah.
Thanks so much for that book.
Oh,
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
And if you keep it on
that book you gave
airplane
me
mode, it
on
should
your
have
birthday.
a lot more battery. At this point, actually, we might as well just do that too.
That was a great
Yeah.
birthday present I got you for
Alright,
birthday.
thanks.
Alright, thank you.
You know, we haven't even really touched on that, and I think that I really intended on spending a lot of time talking about those planetary boundaries because I think that's such an important.
Absolutely important. And that's kind of what the context, once you get to understand it in the context, then you can really see why it's important.
Yeah. So, but you know, I do think John Brown's legacy. It's an interesting one to talk about because if it wasn't for John Brown's courageous act, did it really bring about violence, and did it reduce violence? It certainly changed violence.
Mhm.
It changed the people who were experiencing the violence.
That's a very difficult question, and I think I got a chance, by the way, after I retired. Finally, I could go to the John Brown Lives thing in the class. First time ever. It's always conflicted with graduation day. Now I don't have to go to graduation. I can go to John Brown Lives and check it out. It's quite an experience.
It is.
Actually. But the thing, the reason I mention that is because regardless of the violence, the violent dimension of it, right, the important thing for me was the way that's inspired other people to stand up for freedom and equality. I had the whole exhibit in the barn. You've seen that.
Yeah.
About the efforts to, like the whole Timbuktu project up around Lake Placid. I mean, that's not a violent project. And I was so disheartening in a sense to see the quotes from some of the people involved with that. So the level of racism, the insane level of racism is incomprehensible. And this is in 1850. Yeah, you're still talking the same thing. The same level of racism is still incomprehensible. You're fighting the same battles all the time. It turned out that some of those weapons didn't. Well, it's deeper than those weapons. I mean, it's something fundamental in the human psyche. You're up against, well, it says, and keep back to scripture about, we're up against principalities and powers. There's some evil forces at work here, and to try to deal with it kind of on the surface. There's something deeper than that. It seems to me like this whole thing about the tuition. It's not just a matter of the cost of it and who should pay it, but the whole notion of the social value of education.
It comes down to a change in basic human understanding of our relationship with each other.
Yeah, human nature. You don't get anywhere close to that mostly. And it's a very interesting remark. I thought I read when I was in Florida. I took a book down. It's talking about how all the different qualifications for different positions. To get your resume and stuff. Never mentions anything about your spiritual, capacities and your spiritual standing where you are. That's irrelevant. And there's a great question. It's along the same lines in Rianne Eisner's book. The second book she has called The Real Wealth of Nations, and it's called Creating and Carrying Economics. And she's got this great question in here. She says, you say, what's wrong with the picture that we pay the plumbers and people who take care of our pipes 10 or 20 times more than we pay our daycare workers who take care of our children? There's something wrong with the system that does that.
Yes.
What we value. We value our pipes and our engines and our mechanics, everything. We value our kids. As Dan Berggren was just comparing, his daughter asked, do we value that? There's levels of what's valued in society. I spent my whole life teaching. You know, I probably my entire life earnings for something like Trump makes in a week. You know, and who's more valuable, societally speaking?
And you know, this makes me think of what David Suzuki, you know, writes about, you know, economics. You know, traditional economics really being a form of brain damage.
Yeah, absolutely. It's out of touch with reality, therefore it's insane. That's taking M. Scott Peck's definition of sanity.
Yes.
The dedication to reality at all costs. That's the definition of mental health. Anything that departs from reality, you're going crazy.
And you know what I did, as I mentioned it in our introduction, we met at Mandy Bernstein's funeral. That I brought Mandy's book with me, and I gave it to John because I wanted him to check it out, because it's been years since I've read it, but he talks about the difference between education and schooling.
Well,
You know,
education and training, same thing, you know, same distinction. You're trained to do this, but education, it comes from educare, to lead out. That's the literal Latin meaning of it, to lead out to a better place. I used to tell kids all the time, you've been in school, I was saying, care to get your education, or anybody ever tell you what education meant? To lead out, educare. Okay, and that's what you try to do. I talk about providing alternatives, new perspectives and stuff. When I went to Binghamton, again, how much we put in this segment, but I went to Binghamton. I came from a very narrow, blue-collar household. My father had a 6th grade education. I had my first steak when I was 21. Fish and hamburgers and stuff. Very narrow. And I went to Binghamton and blew my doors off. So, wow, is this great or what? You know, terrific. You know, a whole new world out there. And that's what I tried to conjure up with the kids at Paul Smith's. A lot of them were first-generation kids coming out of Molloy and these backwoods places. Their experience of what's out there. You know, wow. You know, it's not these idiots that talk about indoctrination, liberal indoctrination, and no, there's nothing about that. You know, and these people have never been around it. They're the ones that are indoctrinated. They talk about projection. They're the ones that have been brainwashed, and projecting their brainwashing on everybody else, like everybody else does that. That's not what real education is about. And I took the sheet of paper because one of the things, I'm going to laugh when you see this. It's not going to show up in the around. I used to tell kids what my view of reality was like. Okay, and the reality was like that. What are you talking about? Well, the way you figure out where truth is where most lines converge. Okay, you've got a couple that might converge over here someplace, or maybe over here, but where most stuff converges is where you begin to find where reality lies. Okay? And you get something that, like Thomas Friedman said in the Lexis Analytica, he talked about what he called information arbitrage. Where he said to understand anything, you've got to look at it from a whole bunch of different perspectives. And I think it's very interesting. He listed 6, and he left out spirituality. Okay, 6. Talking about a mindset. You know, we talked about economics, politics, you know.
so would you say he's a scientific materialist? Like
No, he's well, I know he's scientific materialist so much, he's just brought up in the educational system that dismisses that. It doesn't come on his radar. You know, it's not really personal like that. But I think it's very interesting that he left out the religious and spiritual orientation, which is one of the big ones. That's one of the reasons, by the way, we have so much trouble dealing with the Middle East. They try to deal with them in terms of economics or military power or whatever it is. Nobody talks about things in the religious. Everything filters to the religious.
And look at even domestic political situation, I'm thinking, look at the incredible weight and political and social power a guy like John Hagee has, or some of these Christian evangelicals, and yet it seems like there's no desire to really engage them.
Well, no, that's another problem, because a lot of these Christian evangelicals, I think about Jerry Falwell Jr. back in the gun. There's a great story about that, about him, another guy, 2 guys down in Latin America, and 2 priests, and he said, I see you're giving up praying. He says, no, I haven't. He says, well, how come you're carrying a gun? That's the same kind of thing. But the trouble with a lot of these fundamentalist evangelical religious right guys, okay, is first of all, they bought into this privatized, relationship with God, which I think translates into privatization and other things as well. Okay, but also they bought into this gospel of wealth. God wants you rich, and they don't know what Bible they're reading, but there's nothing about it. Jesus said, how hard it is for a rich man to go through in the kingdom of God. No, it's I don't know what their Bible they're reading, what the interpretive framework they're bringing to it. And you get some real far-out kooks. I got a book that I picked up at a book sale last summer. It translates the entire Genesis narrative in the garden into a white supremacist narrative. And read the Bible through a white supremacist lens. And you got Hitler talking about how Jesus was his friend because he was the one that was really against the Jews. Are you crazy? He was a Jew. You hear all the Jews? You nuts? You got all these people reading the Bible through these different bizarro interpretive frameworks.
Have we talked about, are you familiar with the Schofield Bible?
Schofield or Jefferson?
No, the Schofield Bible. The Schofield was an early, like, right-wing Bible, not so much. But very much used in right-wing evangelical circles, but not so much, I guess, not at all from an anti-Semitic perspective, but more from a very anti-Islamic perspective. And, just full of footnotes purporting to be, translations from the original, incredible work maybe of scholarship. Maybe.
Maybe. Interesting point about that, by the way, if you read the story of Pentecost a couple of weeks ago, and you have the apostles come out, they're full of the Holy Spirit, and all these different languages. Guess what one of the languages was that they proclaimed in? They have
Arabic.
They have the Jews, Greeks, and Arabs. They're all there hearing about it. The Gospels originally came in Arabic as well as anything else they're talking about. And they can get into a whole thing about that. Don't get like a quote unquote Islamophobic translation.
Too off on a tangent here.
But but that's really interesting if you bring that up. An Islamophobic reading of the scriptures. No, it's for everybody. It's for everybody.
Yeah, and so much of our conversation. I mean, I've got to say, I have a little concern. I have a lot of friends who, politically, we see eye to eye, but I think a lot of people in our country are comfortable with sort of a scientific materialist worldview.
Yeah, and that's the trouble, because then you can't take seriously the kind of spiritual practice that makes it possible to address some of these deeper issues and human issues.
Exactly. So I think it's really important that we talk about that, yet I'm aware that I feel like we may be putting off some of our audience, because I think a lot of people are fundamentally uncomfortable talking about it.
Well, we can fix that, because you can turn it. See, a lot of that discomfort, I think, comes from just not being aware of the way to frame it, and being emotional about it instead of just looking at how it works. And the two people to look at, go too far into it to really put that on the map. I used to use this in my ethics class. We got into the intuitionist method, the spiritual method, and philosophy. The two people who look at that are Ken Wilber and John Polkinghorne. Okay, Ken Wilber, I think, is probably our most important philosopher. He's kind of a maverick. He's jumped ship,
Okay, I don't know if
he's one of the most important guys. What he's worked on most of his career is integrating science and religion in a philosophical sense. And without getting too far into this, he talks about this four-quadrant model of reality, okay, where you have the inner and the outer. It's like a balloon, okay. You've got the inner, but the outer implies an inner. Okay, you can't discount the inner, so already you give the inner some credibility. And then within that, you have the personal and the social. So you have the outer personal, outer social, inner personal, inner social. Okay? And these four make up a total picture of reality. And so, for example, in the case of the inner social, for instance, you have all this common that we have psychologically speaking. Psychotherapy wouldn't work if we didn't have some common psychological stuff. So we have that kind of thing. You also have the inner individual. It's all the private memories and fantasies, things you have just in secret to yourself. And those two together make up this inner world, which is no less real than the outer world. That's one of the first ways we think about the credibility of religion.
Did he predate Peck?
It may have been about contemporary, about the same time.
Yeah.
I'd say 80s, about that.
Okay.
About that. So they're working along the same lines. But the point is, just philosophically speaking, the second guy you look at is John Polkinghorne. He used to use this stuff in my ethics class. He was the same connection. He was a mathematical physicist at Cambridge University and he jumped ship in midlife and became an Anglican priest. So he has real expert knowledge on both sides of the fence, right? And one of the things that he said, this is really relevant to what we're talking about. One of the things that he said was that the religion and science have four things in common. You know, you think they're flats and so on, four things in common. And he said one of those is that they each depend on a combination of facts and interpretations. We're talking interpretive frameworks. You probably got a text sitting there. And you got, you know, a lot of different interpretive frameworks. Everything you look at in science or in religion depends on having an interpretive framework. You don't have just a bunch of junk of it. You're interpreting your physical data through a certain framework. The right framework. So that's one thing they got in mind. Secondly, it depends on the chosen point of view. Okay, stand one place, you can see this. If I turn over here, I can't see Serena anymore. I see I can see that. So you can see different things from different points of view. And science is one point of view, religion is another.
Yeah, so to help triangulate the truth,
exactly.
really.
Exactly. That's something here. Okay.
Yeah.
Third one is they both rely on evidence, various kinds. And Richard Dawkins says that faith is believing something on the basis of no evidence. Nonsense. Nobody believes something on the basis of no evidence.
Yeah.
There can be some evidence, maybe faulty, maybe partial, maybe whatever. Nobody believes something on the basis of no evidence. And fourthly, he says they both ask and answer why questions. And the cool thing about the way he illustrates that, and this makes the point as well as anything, Teddy's being English when he talks about the water boiling on the stove. And he says the question, why is the water boiling? Okay, one answer to that is because it's 212 degrees Fahrenheit and that's the boiling point of the water. Okay. Second answer is because I want to make some tea. They're both right. They're both right.
Different perspectives, but they're both correct
if you're
answers.
concerned about affinity about religion, that's how you begin to think about it. There's different perspectives. You put them together, and I used some maps, a road map and a topo map from up here to make the same point. Like I had a road map, and I had Paul Smith's in the middle, which is your center of the road, so it's the center of the map, right? And you got the road maps and the route numbers and all this other stuff. And down south at the top of the lake, you got this huge white spot. And as far as that map goes, it's up and down there. If you got a topo map of that area, it's the Coal River Valley, guess what you got? You got trails, you got leaders, you got all kinds of stuff. There's no sign of a road. Those roads and maps don't look anything alike, but you don't get a complete story from the
They're both accurate. They're both true.
Yeah, they're both true. Right?
And you would never get the whole picture.
Yeah, but you've got that's what I'm talking about here.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, you know, I've always been extremely fascinated and intrigued by the intersection between science and religion. I mean, hence
well, I will lend you a book from Ken Wilber if you want to read it.
I would love
I'll
to.
bring it up for you before you go.
Thank you. Yeah, because I mean that's really what interested me in Scott Beck. You know, was.
But Ken Wilber's really got it figured out. And I think John Polkinghorne same thing. Why is the water boiling?
And you know, back to that quote you said about faith. Can you reiterate that faith?
Yeah, that's what Richard Dawkins says, and I'll tell you my easiest way to refute that. He says that faith is believing something on the basis of no evidence. And the best way to refute that is get on an airplane sometime. Lock yourself into your seat. You're putting your life in the hands of somebody you've never seen, never met, no nothing. What evidence do you have that you're going to come down in one place alive before you want to go? You never see the pilot. You know, think about that. And yet, you've got some kind of evidence of credibility of the airline. You know what I mean? It's not believing in something based on no evidence. That's like what no evidence look like. You never see the pilot. You know, wait a minute. But there's evidence in there. You know, come on. Nobody believes something on the basis of when you put your life in the hands of somebody you're never going to see.
And then, you know, the connection, you know, with faith. I mean, it's, you know, really a different subject. But looking together, you know, maybe the results, the fruits of faith. Mm-hmm. There's a line in the Peggy Eyres song about Mary Brown, John Brown's wife, where talking about his two sons that died at Harper's Ferry. How really by faith they were duty bound. You know that. You know, I think when you do have faith, I think in yourself in the natural world, that it does lead you to a sense of duty as far as taking care of it.
You have to be careful of that, though. Again, it's dependent on why it's so important to keep your refining your faith, to make sure you have the faith in the right thing.
Yes. Like
the German army belt buckles in World War II, God is with us. It's Hitler's army. You know, I don't think so. that faith is misplaced. You know, so you need to be careful. It's by this sense of discrimination and continually reclaiming what you're putting your faith in. Talk about idolatry. Is that some idol? Is something you're projecting out here? You know, it's well. There's one you probably remember. You know, Becky had a patient one time named Henry. She was beginning to come around, and she finally her witness said, "That means I'd have to think all the time." She said, "Yeah, I don't want to think all the time." She said, "A lot of people want to think all the time. It's hard work. It's hard work to keep yourself on being when you jerk off all the time. You can keep that yourself. I don't want to think all the time."
Well, and then I think he also, addresses that idea of that, actually we're assuming it's responsibility for ourselves, and that's an awesome,
Absolutely.
and a big thing that I think a lot of people want to avoid is taking responsibility for their lives and their impact on the world.
And with that, you have the tendency we have to reduce everything towards comfort. We don't want to break out and all that. This is scary.
Yeah.
One of my creative writing books talks about that. It says once you realize that possibilities are infinite, the jig is up. You can't have no more defenses about not doing this. You're scared. It's possibility is more frightening than impossibility.
Yeah.
That's right. Impossibility is more frightening than impossibility. Well, I can't do that. I'm just here. No, you could. No.
But it's going to involve growth. It's going to involve.
Yeah, and it's education. That's why, by the way, I think quite 50% of people who, historically, since they started keeping records, 50% of people who start an educational program don't finish it. Because they're afraid they can either have the response that, wow, this is cool, or oh, I don't think I like this.
Yeah.
That's again 50-50. Interesting split.
Mm-hmm.
People that are intrigued by growth and expansion, other people are terrified by it.
So anyway, I'm thinking of switching gears and going back maybe to talk about that 50-50 split politically.
Mm-hmm.
And
interesting segue.
yeah, well, yeah, and I thought it was appropriate there. We do have a legacy of a lot of the worst things we're living with right now in terms of the economic crisis, in terms of what's happened to media, and then even if you look at imperialism, say, if you look at Vietnam, if you look at things, we've had maybe more effective salesmanship of a lot of these negative things from the Democrats than we have from the Republicans. They've been more effective at it because they've more effectively, I think, disguised it.
Well, there's I don't know if this is quite related to that, but I'll say it anyway since I'm in my mind connect into it and see where it goes. There's a terrific book by Thomas Frank called Pity the Billionaire.
Okay, I've heard of that. Maybe you mentioned it to me.
He talks about somebody who's got his finger right on what's going on. And I don't know if this fits into what you said or not, but I think he's got a couple of other ones out which fault. Jim Wallace says the same thing. He faults Democrats for not having that in its spiritual base. Republicans have co-opted the spiritual thing, they've directed it toward the wealth. Democrats have tried to do something else, but they're not building on a spiritual basis. Neither side understands it. But this thing from Thomas Frank is a wonder. We talk about somebody that's got it exactly right. In fact, it responds to a question that a friend of mine asked, what happened to the Occupy movement? You think about that. And I'll tell you how this works. What Frank does in the book is to talk about the historical place after the Great Depression, okay, where you have these things put in place like the Glass-Steagall collection, these protections against banking abuses and things like that. And so he said, historically, traditionally, government has been the protector of people against these abuses by Wall Street and oligarchs and everybody else. Okay. So you go along, what happens in Sandy Weill, 1980s, and so on, Clinton stuff. Sandy Weill prides himself in destroying Glass-Steagall. Breaks down the wall between investment banking and commercial banking. Leads to 2008 economic collapse. We just barely got back where we were before the economic collapse. Losing income. We have never regained this also. Okay, so we have this whole thing going on. What does Obama and the administration there do? We put, Dodd-Frank in place. Right? Another set of protections. Right? Guess what? Now we don't want to repeal Dodd-Frank. what we're doing is setting up the same set of conditions. But what Frank says really, really significant. He said what we had in 2009, and you remember when the executives flying to Washington in private jets asked for money, and the public really got bent. You know, tremendous amount of rage directed against Wall Street, where it belonged. All right? And that's where the Occupy movement came to focus, that rage on the people that deserved it. Cynically speaking, and Frank traces this out. The oligarchs, the way to deflect that rage away from Wall Street onto government, you know, keeping with some of this conservative ideology. And that you can almost fit the date when that kicked in. That's the date the Occupy movement became irrelevant. Because now we're not mad at Wall Street anymore, now we're mad at the government, and now we can tear apart the government and blow everything up. And let the government defend and seriously what they want. With all that big government, it's not like some big government over there. They successfully flipped our rage against where it belongs.
Well, they inverted the truth.
Exactly
They
right.
completely inverted the truth.
That's his point. And you can see it happening again. People fall for it. You know, the same thing.
Well, and I was struck, the last job I had, I guess what I was really struck by was the number of people who were just inculcated against socialism.
Yeah, well, that's the thing about it. Yeah, but in socialism, again, is that people haven't investigated exactly what it's about, really. It has this kind of, it's like pornography, nobody knows what it is, but they kind of...
They know it when they see it.
Yeah, they know what they say. And see, the other side of that, and again, I was thinking about this T-shirt I saw one time, or heard about one time, I thought it was advertised. It had a picture of Harpo and Groucho and Zeppelin and Gummo, and I said, sure, I'm a Marxist. That's a real interesting, almost bought one. But anyway, my point about this is if you can get past the inflammatory part of the word Marxist, there are a lot of critiques about some of the inherent deficiencies in the whole capitalist system. One, for example, is in Daniel Bell, his book, The Cultural Contradictions of Capitalism, in 1976, I think. He said that one of the fundamental contradictions in that system, I'll come back to the socialism thing in a minute, but one of the fundamental contradictions in the capitalist system, as we know it, is that we have on one hand an urge to long-term deferral of gratification. For example, you don't get paid every day, you have to pay a week or 2 weeks or a month or something like that. And on the other side, are encouraged to hurry in or immediate gratification to buy stuff. You have this total split all the time between the delayed gratification and immediate gratification. They're always kind of pulled between those. Hurry in, no, hurry anywhere. I'm going to take my coffee. Thank you very much. But that guy, as long as hurry for his benefit, deal with it. But you got those two. That's one of those many contradictions. It's a book by David Berggren called 17 Contradictions in Anti-Capitalism. And I mention that because if you say, well, you don't like socialism, capitalism's no great shakes either. See, it's got all kinds of unexamined deficiencies and tensions in it that, and come back to something like what Clark was talking about, become almost fatal flaws. Mm-hmm. It's not again, these drops out of heaven someplace. We didn't have capitalism and other stuff. Back to what I said at the beginning, you create yourself in some historical context, and you think this is the way things have to be. Not necessarily. And again, it would sound like a Marxist, with Harpo going up on Groucho and Zeppelin, but it's something to look at. One of those alternative things. That great line they had at the up in the students' in the library, school from Aristotle, I think, attributed to Aristotle. It says the truly marked and truly educated person in mind is to be able to entertain an idea without necessarily accepting it. Mm-hmm. You don't mean you have to buy that, but consider it. What do you think? You don't like socialism. A, what is that? B, what are some of the deficiencies in the system we've got? And maybe that would be an improvement on it. If nobody's investigated that. We had a thing in the New York Times last week that just about drove me wild. I try to avoid looking at the news, but sometimes you can't avoid noticing. It's a front page story about this, some of the greatest, opponents of climate change are now students, with high school students. And they quoted this high school student, the teacher was trying to teach about climate change. She said, "Yeah, as scientists make mistakes all the time." Well, it's something you can tell that. It's something straight off Fox News. And of course, the teacher responded by getting upset. And of course, that's a teachable moment. And the questions that come out of that, first off, can you give me an example of that? But she can't. All right. Secondly, that's granted. Are they making a mistake in this case? And what's the evidence for that? All right. But you can't do that either. They're doing some investigation of it. So they'd say, well, scientists do things wrong all the time. Well, yeah, but to use that as a teachable moment to begin to investigate. Well, I don't like socialism. Well, what do you mean you don't like? What is it? What are you talking about? Is he get into it? Think about it a little bit.
Do you think some of these reactions by students and many others are really driven by like a growing anti-intellectualism? That's
always has been. It's always been an anti-intellectual country.
Okay. My impression is that it's really intensified.
No, I think it's intensified, and I think one of the reasons it's intensified, and I'm putting myself out on a trail. I think one of the reasons it's intensified has come about. We talked about this before, as a result of the rise of the internet. And I mentioned that it's one of my favorite books. I read it out to a student 4 years ago. She still has it. I know where she is, but I haven't got it back. By Nicholas Carr, called The Shallows. It came out in 2010. It's of interest, I think, to you guys, especially for internet people. And what Nicholas Carr talks about in there is the experience he had of jumping onto this digital revolution early on. And he began to notice, as time went on, that his ability to make connections was deteriorating. And he kind of worked on that. This is an investigation. It turns out that the hyperlinks on the internet over here, physiologically change the structure of the brain. It's what the brain physically accommodates or what it pays attention to. Right? Such that you can spend all your time bouncing around on the web and this and that, and your brain gradually loses the capacity to make connections among things. It's not that you're stupid, you just can't do it anymore. The brain won't do it. That's one of the reasons I never used any internet stuff in my classes. You guys can get that anywhere. Here, we're going to practice making connections, keep those synapses alive. Nice. I don't mind you doing this other stuff. Well, if you lose that, you're toast. And I think that physiological shift in the physical structure of the brain is part of what's driving that anti-intellectualism. Intellectualism means you've got to look at stuff, see the connections, like we've been talking about, see the connections, see the pattern. You can't do that. You just get frustrated. There's somebody who's learning disabled, and can't put, things are all mixed up, and forget it, I can't do it.
Yeah.
Same thing there, you can't make these connections, the hell with it, you quit.
Yeah.
Again, there are other factors.
And it seems to lend itself to a top-down system of everything because people want to give up their autonomy.
Well, I don't know if they want to. It's not. It's even one of the key in that is that most of what we're living with, and I find it even upstairs. I have to get through a whole bunch of internet feed stuff to get to my email. And I've tried to resist this, but even for me, it's difficult to resist. So much of what we live with is addictive. It's not even you want to. It's addictive. Sugar is an addictive substance. The internet is addictive. TV is addictive. All this stuff you're addicted to it. You can't stay away from it. You keep looking at it. And it's not like you want to give up your autonomy. It's created to be addictive.
I recently learned about the creation of World of Warcraft, and you heard me talk about this because I was telling Mike or fiance about this. But have any of you read about how Steve Bannon got like $60 million from Goldman Sachs to launch this World of Warcraft? And they basically made every effort to like scientifically deduce how they could maximize the addictiveness of it. And they could measure the face time, like the people, not just that it was on, but that the people were physically doing something. And they were trying to maximize the interaction between the human and the game. And so they were basically like simultaneously launching all these things and measuring them, plugging them into algorithms. And it was like a self-perpetuating. They like kind of made this thing as addictive as it could possibly be. And then the article I read, it talked about some of the personal stories of people who got into it. I mean, they were just so tragic. But then to think about how this was cynically created to do this.
That concludes this episode for North Country Podcast. Thank you for listening. We'd like to leave you with this song by Dan Berggren.
Never mind all this talk. Will there be deer trails I can walk? Will the forests and streams still be alive? When I'm a grown-up like you, can I live and work here too? That's what my daughter asked me last night. I didn't know what to say, but I believe that someday we'll learn how to take care of this old earth. Some lessons are hard to learn, like thinking of the long term, with the short term staring you right in the face. There have always been a few who'll buy anything 'cause it's new. Too quick to cast off something that's old. Don't be tempted by greed, by those who sell things you don't need. Don't take nothing that you can't use. Don't let them sell you their views like commercials between the news. Beware of easy answers for free. Asking questions instead helps us learn what's ahead. Looking for answers is the price to pay. Never mind all this talk. Will there be deer trails I can walk? Will the forests and streams still be alive? When I'm a grown-up like you, can I live and work here too? That's what my daughter asked me last night. I didn't know what to say, but I believe that someday we'll learn how to take care of this old earth.